very fortunate to have a special guest here at the Comlink this week, Fon Davis, who I struggle to even introduce because you are so many things. You're a former ILM model maker, a creative director at New Deal Studios, the creative director of Fonco, and a teacher at the Stan Winston School.
Yes.
Amazing career that you've had. Welcome to the show.
Well, thank you. Thanks for having me.
Of course, of course. Obviously, this is a show about Star Wars and all things related to Star Wars. You are a Star Wars veteran, among many other movies. Wanted to ask you about your time at ILM, particularly working there around the prequel era, the special edition trilogy era.
Yeah.
I mean, what was it like being at ILM that time? What was the energy like in the model shop?
Yeah, it was pretty amazing because I grew up a Star Wars fan.
Right.
So of course that's why I got into motion pictures. I saw that Lauren Peterson and these famous model makers making models in Star Wars, and I thought, wow, you could do that for a living?
Yeah.
How awesome is that? And so when I got there, I was just thrilled to be there.
Right.
And we had no idea that they were going to be doing more Star Wars.
So you must have started at what, 96?
96, yeah.
Right, okay.
Yeah, same week as Grant Imahara, who was on our show
Who was on our
recently,
show,
yes.
that's right.
Yeah.
So was it First Contact was kind of going on at that time, or it just wrapped?
It was right before First Contact, yeah. And we were actually doing some stuff for commercials mainly. A lot of the new model makers would work in commercials just because the veteran model makers would be on features. And so it was always a big deal to get onto features and stuff. So, but we were just happy to be there. And then shortly after I started working there, they started the special editions. And I was like, wow, things have really come full circle. To actually work on the very same movies that got me into the industry in the first place was like kind of mind-blowing.
Rumor has it you were actually not only just a part of this behind the scenes, but I hear that some interesting things happened with some costumes and getting in front of the camera.
Oh, yeah. Every once in a while, we would need shots of just background creatures and characters and things like that. So we would dress up in costumes and walk around in front of green screens.
That must have been so difficult to just, I mean, you can maybe tell a significant other or your parents, but you can't talk about any of this stuff.
Oh yeah,
at the
still
time.
To this day, there's a lot we can't talk about.
That's right.
Yeah.
Even back then, stuff that happened back then, or just,
oh, absolutely, yeah. There's a lot of stuff, and it's smart. You know, they just want to control the media and how things are portrayed, and
of course
keep the image of Star Wars clean, and and they want to be able to roll things out when they plan on it.
Right, in order to successfully build all the hype and all that.
Yes.
Exactly. So let me ask you about this. Episode 1 was a huge movie. From 97 to 99, very similar to what we're all experiencing now with Episode 7, but to go back to 99, what was it like at ILM with the secrets, the working on sensitive material, in terms of secret sets, secret models?
Yeah, it was very, very intense. All the props were tracked very, very carefully. All the pieces of artwork were guarded. We tried very hard to, even moving things from one building to the other, we would cover them in bedding, like bed sheets and things like that, just to keep them from being seen. Because we even there was a helicopter school close to ILM, and they would do little flyovers. And there were a lot of people that would just kind of cruise through looking to see if they could spot something. So we had to be very careful, even just on campus there.
Wow, that's amazing. And of course, you had some very sensitive real-world material there.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, set pieces that you were creating.
Yeah.
Even in San Rafael, California.
Yeah, we actually did more miniatures for the prequels than were done in the original series.
Wow.
And for a long time, a lot of people didn't even know about it because the focus was on the new computer technology, which was really revolutionary and groundbreaking at the time.
Is that why? I mean, there is this idea in sort of popular culture of the press that the Phantom Menace and the Prequel Trilogy didn't have as many models, but really they didn't. Why is that? Is it just because of the hype machine of digital, or?
At the time when that came out, computer graphics was still pretty new. That was right on the heels of Jurassic Park, which was really the first real breakthrough movie. That and Terminator 2 and The Abyss. Those are the real huge CG films. So it was right after those, and a lot of the technology that was used was brand new. Like we shot Attack of the Clones all digital, which had never been done before on a feature. So that was kind of a big deal. And we also used performance capture for the clones, which had never been done before. And there was a lot of firsts in all that technology. So that's, I think, why there was such a focus on that part of the visual effects, because miniatures have been done since the beginning of motion pictures and they continue to use them now. It's just like wardrobe or other things. It's not any less remarkable. It's just, it wasn't the new shiny toy,
Right.
So.
Well, even in digital, they had to have a physical maquette, right, to start with, that they would scan, or something physical, or were they just creating things completely digitally?
Well, they had an art department at Skywalker Ranch, and they would build a lot of models and a lot of maquettes, and those were actually all done by hand. And then I was running the 3D scanner for Attack of the Clones. So we would scan some of that stuff into the computer, and then they would have to then rebuild from the scan. So the scan was really just for reference to get the shape, and then they would have to rebuild it so they could animate it.
Right, so they have to build the rig with the joints and everything.
Yeah. Point cloud data that comes from 3D scanners is still, even to this day, it's pretty messy.
A lot
By
of
animation standards. It's just a very heavy model. And it probably wouldn't really bend the way you would want it to bend. It has to be designed to work,
What was the internal dialogue like between the model-making tradition and sort of the newer CG group? Was that something that was a constant lunchtime conversation, or was it different from show to show?
It was different from person to person. For some people, there was actually a rivalry between CG and practical, and for some of us that really loved computer technology, because I was always kind of a hybrid person. I really saw the benefits of computer technology, and I also see the benefits of practical. To this day, that's what I advocate. That's what I always push for. It's whatever makes sense, whatever's going to look better and be more efficient, get done, all those things that are important. I think there was more of a comfort level between the CG artists and the practical by the time we finished all those movies, because there was so much collaboration between the groups. In Attack of the Clones, we actually designed a pipeline to where we would get the animatics from Skywalker Ranch. We would take those animatics, we would break those down and create plans for the miniatures. And then from those same animatics, the CG department would do their computer models. And then anything we generated for laser cutting, CNC, and all the technology-based fabrication tools we used, we would share with the CG department and vice versa. So there was a lot of collaboration just even in the construction of these things and how they're going to work together in the same scene.
Right.
And since the computer also controlled the cameras at that time, all the motion control cameras for the miniatures, we could actually grab the camera data from those same animatics, plug those into the camera.
Wow.
And then it was some work. You still had to tweak it and things like that. But you started with something that was much cleaner and seamless and like the original vision, more so than you did on previous movies.
So you had a supervisor or somebody basically saying, that's going to models, that's going to straight to CG, that's going to this or that, from the previs?
Yeah, there were multiple supervisors and multiple. That was always a big conversation. What are you going to do practical? What are you going to do CG? Sometimes it had to do with time. Sometimes it had to do with money. Sometimes it had to do with quality. That's why I say it was very complicated. There's a lot of moving parts.
And of course, the Phantom Menace, there was that great documentary, The Beginning, where you can see John Knoll and a few others, Dennis Muir, and just like looking at it going, we don't have a great way of doing this right now. We don't know how we're going to do this. George with his markers. What of the three films of the prequel trilogy would you consider to be the most pressure? Was there a moment that was just really scary for you working on it? Or maybe just something that you're incredibly proud of that you pulled off that you weren't sure you were going to be able to do?
I wouldn't even be able to narrow it down to like one movie out of the over 30
just
that
all
I've
of them
worked
then?
on.
Yeah.
No, because every time you do a feature or a different scene in a movie even, you're constantly researching and reinventing ways you're going to do things, because every director, especially someone like George Lucas, wants to do something new and different.
Yeah.
And just by definition, you end up doing all kinds of crazy stuff that you've never done before. So, I'm really proud of all of it. I was really excited about working on those, and it was just so overwhelming. There's so much going on in those movies. It's not usually like that. Even in the newer movies, you see a lot of action and a lot of effects and things, but not so many worlds. We really did travel to so many different planets, and there's so many different creatures. And
so much to build and design.
Yeah, and they ran the gamut. You had robots and just all the different styles. It was very, very, very fun, yeah.
There are a lot of photos of you online with incredible models. Episode 1, you get the Trade Federation ship, the pod racing sequence. Episode 3, General Grievous's hangar. When you watch those movies, what is it like for you? Are there particular shots that you look at that you go, I'm super proud of that? Or do you have, like George Lucas, if only I could just tweak that one little thing?
Yeah, there is one scene in Phantom Menace. I'm not going to point it out.
Okay, all right. So we have to go look for it then.
There was one scene, you might be able to spot it, but there was one scene in Phantom Menace where I felt like we got too close for the scale of model that we were using.
Oh, okay.
Drives me nuts every time I see it, because I feel like it should have been a bigger scale, but we were on a schedule, we were on a certain budget and everything, so it was like not possible to build a set just for that one shot, and that's what it would have been. And that's what you actually have to weigh out sometimes, is like, if an asset is in 100 shots, it's easier to justify spending a lot of money on it because you amortize that cost over those shots. But when you have something that's in one shot, it's really hard to justify spending a lot of time and money on that one shot.
So you just put enough detail into that model for how at the time it's going to be shot.
Yeah.
I see.
Yeah.
And this one was just that the camera
It was
brought in
never
too
designed
close.
to get that close. They needed the shot.
So now we have to go and guess as to which one it is,
sure,
right?
you can guess.
Okay.
If you're a miniature aficionado, you probably already know the shot, and it probably already bothers you.
Okay. For those of us who aren't miniature aficionados, though, you have a DVD set about building models.
Oh yeah, yeah.
That you put together and directed and that you star in as well. Can you tell us a little bit about those?
Yeah, I actually started in education because I started to see, one, a shortage of model makers, believe it or not.
Wow.
Professional model makers. Because the big difference between professional model makers and amateurs is the amateur takes pride in how long they spend on a model. They might say, I spent a year on this airplane, or whatever. And a professional's like, I spent a week or a day, or I did this last night while watching TV. You know, it's about doing things that make it look like you spend a long time without spending a long time. And that's really what I focus on with my DVDs. So I have an introduction to professional model making. And I just did one that's kind of focused on art department model making, which is different because you're in an office space. You can't work with a bunch of paints and chemicals and power tools. So it's really just what you can do with a knife and some foam core.
Interesting.
You know,
yeah.
So.
That's really cool. So one of the things I wanted to ask you, we mentioned that Grant Imahara was on the show, your colleague.
Yeah, yeah.
He said something really interesting, and I wanted to get your interpretation on this. I asked him what he learned at ILM, one of the things he learned in the model shop, and he said, the answer is always yes, unless it's clearly no.
Yes.
What does that mean to you? What does that mean to you?
No, that makes total sense. I always go back to the old Hollywood saying, the show must go on. You know, if they need something, they need it. It's not optional, you know. If you've got to make a spaceship blow up and fly through a hole at the same time, or, you know, disintegrate in 4 directions instead of 6, you got to make that happen. And the answer is yes, you know. And then you have, sometimes you say yes, then you walk out of the room and you go, oh, how am I going to do that? And then you figure it out.
Yeah.
But you always do. And one of the great things about the filmmaking process and about ILM and even any of the studios I work with now is it's such a collaborative process. And there's always so many smart people, so many creative people around you. If you don't know the answer, you can definitely tap into the talent pool around you. That's how I learned everything. You know, I didn't come out of the womb knowing everything I know, obviously. It was that brain trust that we had at ILM that really made it all happen.
And you were working for Lauren Peterson at the time.
Well, the first job I did was with Lauren Peterson.
And what was the first movie you worked on?
It's Nightmare Before Christmas.
Oh, of course, but that I'm
was
sorry.
Before ILM.
That was 93.
At ILM.
Yeah, at ILM.
Oh boy, I remember Men in Black was the first feature to come in while I was there, but I didn't work on that one. I want to say Deep Impact, maybe. It's funny because we were working on that while they were doing Armageddon and a remake of Meteor.
Right.
For television.
Right. That was back in that day where everything came in 2s or 3s, right?
Yeah, it seems like 3s.
Yeah, like with The Abyss there was Leviathan, with A Bug's Life there was Ants, there was all that kind of going on.
There was Deep Star 6 also.
Deep Star 6 as well, there were those 3.
There was 3.
Yeah, you're right.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that seemed to go from the 80s all the way through the 90s, you know.
Yeah. You still see it in certain genres.
Yeah, that's crazy. I was going to ask you about some of your other movies because I'm a huge fan, as we were talking before, of Galaxy Quest.
Yeah.
Which, if you haven't seen Galaxy Quest, I just think it's one of the greatest sci-fi movies. Of course, it's a comedy, right? But there's incredible model making, incredible costuming.
Yes. It's the best Star Trek movie ever made.
Right, right, yeah. Yeah, it is actually, as far as classic Star Trek goes, it's a great premise, a great idea, and certainly the only Star Trek movie made about a Star Trek convention. Yeah. You know, what was it like working on that movie?
It was funny because, you know, when we're working on movies, a lot of times we're just working on the VFX. So the only part of the movie we really see is the part that we're working on. So we're not usually privy to the full story. And on Galaxy Quest, we had no idea what it was. And we were always speculating whether a movie's going to be good or bad.
Right.
And we didn't think that was going to be that great of a movie. We're like, oh my God, this doesn't look so good, you know? But then it came out and it was just written so well and it was great and it was very funny and
it's got this little cult following now of people.
It does.
You know, it comes on and everyone's like, oh, that movie's so great. How come nobody knows about this movie?
Yeah. Oh, and here's a great tidbit. You can actually watch the whole movie in Thermian on the DVD or Blu-ray.
Really?
Yeah. In the alternate languages, you could watch it in Spanish and I think French and some other languages. But Thermian is one of them. Wow.
That's so cool.
I've never met anyone who could sit through the entire movie in Thermian, but it's pretty fun to zip through. That should be like a challenge. Like one of those food challenges.
Yeah,
Can
exactly.
you sit through Galaxy Quest?
And do like an MST3K of what you think is going on, right?
Yeah, there you go.
That would be really fun. Well, you said something really interesting about not knowing what the movie was about. So here you are working on the prequels, right? Arguably the most anticipated movies of that time. And you're seeing these models, you're building these things, and you had no idea. What was it like when you got to the theater and you saw it all put together? I mean, did you kind of know the plot ahead of time, or were there things that surprised you?
That one was an unusual case because the Star Wars movies were so heavy on visual effects, unlike any other movie at that time, that we knew a lot more about that movie than most movies, because there was effects in every scene, so you start to see every scene, missing the little pieces. You know, oddly, it was not fun to go see the movie with the people who worked on it.
Because
they're all our colleagues. Because we're all
or...
watching it, you know, from kind of analytical and looking at our scenes and, you know, very professional, you know. And we're all kind of tired, speaking frankly, because we work hard.
Yeah.
But my favorite thing was to go opening day like everyone else.
Yeah.
We'd always get our buddies to get the tickets, and we'd stand in line. And I saw all the movies on opening day at the Coronet. Which is
in San Francisco.
Yeah, which was George Lucas's favorite theater. So we would watch. I would watch it at that same theater with the ILM crew, and then again with the regular audience. And the energy is so incredible at those screenings. It's so much fun. It becomes more of an event.
Yeah.
You know, not just a movie anymore at that point.
Were there any moments in the theater where you watched an audience audibly react to a shot of yours that you worked on?
I can't remember. So I hope I'm not getting old. But no, it's, you know, it was always fun to see what they would react to, because it was completely different than what the crew would react to. Because we would often react to the things that we hadn't seen before. You get people groaning and moaning at certain things.
Well, it seems like we're of a generation, though, when you grew up as a fan and then you enter the industry, that used to be more of a liability. Now it's really an asset. You obviously are a big fan of movies and your conventions, you're speaking everywhere, you're working on a ton of stuff. Is that an asset nowadays?
The reason the industry, or people in the industry, are kind of nervous about fans is because some fans don't have control over themselves on set and might do something to embarrass one of the performers or actors. Or there were people who actually would steal things, which is a big problem on something that you're trying to keep secret. And if someone walks off with a prop, it's not just that they're stealing an item, but it's expensive to make, and they need it for the shot. It didn't happen a lot, but I think that that's what the fear was, of having fans that were like maybe over the top. That said, there were a lot of people working at ILM that grew up on Star Wars and that were arguably fans. It's just we would just really play that down, because you kind of have to prove yourself professionally and show that you can do your job and you can keep your composure around people like George Lucas, and it's just work. And then that once you do that, then you can come out and say, I really enjoyed these when I was growing up. You still kind of downplay it, and then you know, you do this long enough, and then you could just say, yeah, I'm a total fan.
That's really what it is.
But you have to build up to it.
You have to build up to it. Yeah. That's actually a really good insight. But you do, once people prove themselves and they're cool, or they have proven their talent or their weight in gold, and then it turns out, hey, you actually know a lot about this stuff. Hey, you're actually a fan, then it seems safe. Would you say that that's fair?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, because J.J. Abrams is a fan.
Right.
And look what he's doing.
Right.
So.
Because you have to have that inspiration in order to generate so much work. For those that don't know, right? The hours are pretty long that you keep, because you have to love it, right?
Sure, absolutely. We would do, you know, 40 minimum, of course, but most often it was 50 up to 100 hours in a week.
I remember on the prequels, you had ILM would go from like something like 800 to 1,200 people to suddenly being 2,000 people.
Oh yeah.
It seemed like every time there was a movie, it's just like a, you know.
I'll never forget. We actually have a photo from this day. We did a group photo in the ILM model shop. It was 45 of us. And at that meeting, right before the photo was taken, I have this framed on my wall. The head of the model shop, Mark Anderson, says, we are at 45 people in this department. We have never had that many people in this department since I've been here. We are maxed out. We couldn't fit another body in this room. Within a year of that photograph, we were at 120 model makers.
Unbelievable. Yeah. But you must have had to have another building.
Oh, we did.
Yeah,
we were building on the stages. We were building outside. We were building, you know, in another building across campus. And yeah, it really ballooned out. I mean, when we started there, I mean, Jurassic Park had 65 visual effects shots. That was a big movie.
Right.
Okay. And then while we were at ILM in that time period, we hit our first show with 100 shots, and that was like, wow, 100 shots. And then it was 150. Then it was 300. Then it was 500.
Titanic was 500.
When is this going to end? You know, and then in the Star Wars movies, it was like by the third one, I think almost every shot in the movie was a visual effects shot. So you're talking like, over 2,000 shots.
You were there during an explosive period of growth. They obviously moved to San Francisco, and the model shop became kind of its own thing with Kerner. And then you kind of moved on and did your own company.
Yeah.
And that's what you're doing now.
Yeah, well, what would happen is we would work on feature films, all of us there, but we were what was referred to as project-based. So every time there was a movie and it ended, we would get laid off.
Right.
Now, if there was another movie, you would just roll on to that movie, but sometimes there was no movie. So a lot of us did work in our own garages, our own studios, and I had actually built a studio, and I'm kind of really intense about things. And I loved working with those people, so we would get together at my studio, and that studio grew over the years. So in between all the features, we would be doing stuff at my studio, and then every time we did that, it would get a little bigger and a little bigger. So by the time Industrial Light Magic closed their practical division, my studio was pretty nice sized and very well equipped. We had a full art department for design and development, and then a scene shop and a model shop. And then later we even built a stage so we could do photography there.
Right.
And then we got into compositing and editing and you name it.
Before you knew it, you were just basically doing the
full
same thing,
production
full
facility.
production.
Yeah, and that's what I have down here in LA now too.
Well, speaking of what you have now, I know there are a lot of things that you still cannot talk about, but is there anything that's going on now that you can talk about that you're doing, either education-wise or or any projects that you might have just released?
Yeah, well, on the Star Wars side, I still do a lot of work with the archives, restoring all the Star Wars props, so that's a lot of fun.
Oh, very cool.
Yeah, and they just came out with that costumes book.
Yeah, Star Wars costumes, yeah.
Beautiful, beautiful stuff. That's kind of fun to see, like, stuff that you've worked on just even outside of the movies. We do a little bit of everything, so we've done work on wigs and armor and miniatures, and it's really whatever they need help with. I think they have someone doing a lot of the creature stuff. We've done a little bit of that.
A lot of archives have sort of famously disappeared over the years just because the material wasn't meant to last, right? The original Yoda puppet, obviously, was it like a latex puppet, right?
Yeah.
Jabba the Hutt, only the eyes remain.
Right.
Has that changed the way that models or practical props and set pieces in the archives would be built? In other words, you're building things quickly.
Yeah.
It's meant to be kind of temporary, but there's this real market for the permanence of these things in archives. And
there's an interesting story actually that goes back to Stanley Kubrick. When he was doing 2001: A Space Odyssey, he had all the props and models and stuff taken to the dump because he didn't want them reused on other movies. Because back then, they would just go to a warehouse and any director could walk into the warehouse and say, I want that, that, and that for my movie. And that's why you see Robbie the Robot and all these different movies.
Right.
And he didn't want that happening with all his really unique original designs. So he started the tradition of destroying things. So a lot of stuff over the years does get destroyed and chopped into little pieces. Star Wars is a unique movie because they do have the archives and they do archive kind of easy to store items. Some of the stuff lasts longer now because of the materials we're working with, not because we're concerned about archiving them, but just because the technology has advanced and we're working with more silicones than we are latex. So it has a longer shelf life, but we're not really ever focused on the archivability of props and miniatures and costumes when we're working on them.
It's kind of the tail wagging the dog that way, isn't it?
It's just the shot. All we're focused on is the shot. That's all we really have time to concern ourselves with. On the lower budget movies, we joke, if the model or the prop disintegrates as it's leaving the stage, you've done the perfect model.
Right.
Spent no extra time on it. Producers love it.
It looks great in the shot, but as you can see, we cut every corner we could and saved you $1,000 or whatever.
That said, the models for the prequels, everyone knew that those things would go on display and they wouldn't just be seen by the camera. So I think that there was definitely more love put into those models.
Did you ever have just a heartbreaking moment where you had to build something and then blow it up?
It's never heartbreaking.
It's never heartbreaking?
No,
it's
not? Always exciting.
I would think it would. So you're actually making it to blow it up.
Yeah, we always make it to blow up. We load it up with, this is a funny trick that I learned at ILM. A lot of times you load it up with pasta. You spray paint a bunch of pasta, different colors and stuff, because the debris looks like tubes and flat pieces. You try not to use lasagna and macaroni.
Right.
Too recognizable. And you need probably 10 times more debris than you think you need, because most of it flies by the camera so fast you don't see it.
Interesting.
So you end up loading them with a lot of pasta and kind of figuring out how things are going to break. You work with the Pyro guys and you figure out where the fireballs need to come out, where it needs to crack, what will most likely throw something towards camera, which is always fun. So by the time you get to the shoot, you're ready. And it's exciting. It's fun to watch. My first Pyro shoot was actually on Phantom Menace, which was hilarious because I had no idea what it meant to shoot high speed. I kind of had an idea. I mean, I'd been told how we were shooting it. We were going to shoot it really fast, and they're going to slow down the footage to regular speed. I can't remember how fast, but say 120 frames a second, and then you play it back at 24, and it just stretches that out longer.
Now, was that the Radiant 7 at the very beginning?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah. The day we shot, I was very excited. My first Pyro shoot, we get to blow up a Star Wars model. There's a lot of firsts there that were really big for me. My job was to turn on all the lights in the hangar. And we had to run those. They're 12-volt lights. We ran them at 39 volts, which would only last 20 minutes, and then the bulbs would burn out. But we only needed a couple seconds. So I would turn on the lights at the very last minute so we could do lots of shots before the bulbs would burn out. They'd turn on the camera, and the DP would start screaming, because the camera, it's screaming like a banshee. This is just like screaming noise as the camera film is just ripping through this high-speed camera. The DP is like, lights! And I turn on the lights. He goes, action! And it goes, pop. And the model was gone. And I was like, wait, what just happened? I heard about fireballs. I heard about this thing that's it? It sounded like a firecracker, and it was just gone. It was eviscerated. I went to the Pyro guy, Jeff Herron, and I said, so did it work?
Because you have to wait for the dailies, right?
Yeah, we'll see tomorrow, you know? And so we all went home. And then, of course, we watched it in dailies the next day, and here's his beautiful 3-stage fireball with fire shooting out the windows and it breaking apart, and all that stuff happens in such a split second that you can't even perceive it.
Were you, forgive the pun, you were just blown away by the...
Yeah, yeah. Well, yeah, you don't expect it. Well, I didn't, because I hadn't been exposed to that before, so that was a very unique experience.
I could sit here and talk to you about this stuff forever, but we're really glad that you came on the show. Really glad to have you, and thank you so much.
Thank you.
Yeah.